The porch light flickered as Sheriff Sarah Mitchell pulled into her driveway at 3:24 a.m., exhausted from an 18-hour shift investigating a multi-car pileup on Highway 59. All she wanted was to crawl into bed next to her husband Rob and sleep. For a solid 8 hours. 22 years in law enforcement had taught her to function on minimal rest, but tonight her body was demanding what it was owed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Pine Creek had been her home for all 43 years of her life, and serving as its first female sheriff for the past 6 years had been her proudest achievement. The Mitchell family ranch house sat on 3 acres at the edge of town. A wedding gift from her parents 15 years ago when she and Rob tied the knot. Something seemed wrong as Sarah's boots crunched on the gravel driveway. Rob's truck was parked at an odd angle, almost blocking her usual spot. The kitchen light was on, which was unusual at this hour. And most concerning, Emma's bedroom light was on too. Their 12-year-old daughter had strict rules about bedtime, especially on school nights. Sarah checked her watch again. 3:25 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in April. Emma should have been asleep for hours. Probably a nightmare, Sarah muttered to herself, reaching into the back seat for her bag. She had left her service weapon locked in her glove compartment as usual, a safety precaution she'd adopted when Emma was born. As she approached the front door, Sarah noticed muddy boot prints on the porch that didn't match Rob's work boots or Emma's sneakers. Her law enforcement instincts kicked in, overriding her exhaustion in an instant. Silently retrieving her backup weapon from the lockbox under her truck seat, Sarah approached the house with caution. The front door was unlocked, another red flag. Rob was religious about home security, having installed a state-of-the-art system just 3 months ago. Sarah entered quietly, keeping close to the wall as she'd been trained. The kitchen was empty, though a half-empty whiskey bottle sat on the counter alongside 2 glasses. Rob rarely drank on weeknights due to his early construction job, and never whiskey. He preferred beer. Sarah moved through the downstairs, clearing each room with professional precision. Nothing seemed disturbed in the living room. Their family, in photos, still lined the mantel. Emma's school pictures marking her growth, their wedding photo, last summer's fishing trip to Lake Caddo. As Sarah approached the stairs, she heard it. Muffled voices from upstairs, then a sound that froze her. Blood. Emma's voice frightened. "Daddy, please don't." Sheriff Mitchell took the stairs 2 at a time, years of training, keeping her footfalls nearly silent despite her racing heart. The upstairs hallway was dark except for the light spilling from Emma's partially open bedroom door. Another voice, Rob's, spoke. In hushed, urgent tones Sarah couldn't make out. She pressed her back against the wall outside Emma's room, listening. "It'll be our secret, Princess. Mommy doesn't need to know. She's busy all the time anyway." Rob's voice had a slurred quality Sarah recognized from the few times she'd seen him truly drunk. "It hurts," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "I want to go to sleep." Something in Sarah broke at that moment, a shattering that felt physical, even though it happened somewhere deep in her mind. She pushed the door open, weapon raised, to see a scene that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Rob, shirtless, kneeling beside Emma's bed, her daughter's pajama top unbuttoned, tears streaming down her face. The look of shock on Rob's face quickly morphed into something ugly, anger mixed with defiance. "What the hell, Sarah? I'm just checking on Emma. She had a nightmare." Rob stood up, swaying slightly. Emma's eyes told a different story, wide with fear, pleading silently with her mother. Sarah saw the red marks on her daughter's chest and collarbone, the rumpled bedsheets, the way Emma clutched her stuffed rabbit, a gesture she hadn't made since she was 8. "Emma, go to Maria's house next door. Now." Sarah's voice was deadly calm, the tone her deputies knew meant serious trouble. "But Mom," Emma started. "Now, Emma." Sarah never took her eyes off Rob as Emma scrambled out of bed, grabbing her robe. "You're overreacting," Rob said, taking a step toward her. "I was just—" "Touch her again, and I'll shoot you where you—" "Stand!" Sarah interrupted, her service weapon steady in her hands. "Emma, go!" Emma darted past them both, her footsteps pounding down the stairs and the front door slamming moments later. "Put your hands where I can see them, Rob." The sheriff in her had taken over completely now. Rob laughed, an ugly sound. "Are you serious right now? You're going to arrest your own husband? For what? Being a father? For tucking our daughter in? That's not what I saw." Sarah's voice remained steady, even as her mind raced through years of memories, searching for clues she might have missed. The way Emma had grown quieter over the past year, how she'd stopped inviting friends over, how she'd begged to stay at Sarah's parents' house when Sarah worked night shifts. Rob took another step forward, his face contorting. "You don't see anything. You're never here, always at work, always the big important sheriff. Someone has to be a real parent to Emma." "Don't you dare," Sarah hissed. "Don't you dare twist this." Rob lunged suddenly, alcohol making him clumsy, but rage making him dangerous. His hand caught Sarah's wrist, slamming it against the doorframe. The gun didn't discharge, but pain shot up her arm. 15 years of marriage dissolved in that moment, replaced by the cold clarity of a threat assessment. Rob was 6'2", 200 pounds, and had a history of boxing in college. Sarah had her training and a weapon he was trying to take. They struggled in the narrow hallway, crashing against the wall. Family photos rained down around them as frames shattered. Rob's hand closed around her throat, his face twisted into something unrecognizable. Sarah's vision began to darken at the edges. With her free hand, she drove her knuckles into the soft spot under his ribs, a move she'd used countless times to subdue violent suspects. Rob doubled over, but didn't release her. As they crashed into Emma's room, Sarah's back hit the dresser. Pain exploded across her shoulders, but the impact loosened Rob's grip enough for her to bring her knee up sharply. He howled, staggering back, and Sarah raised her weapon again. "On the ground now!" she ordered, falling back on her training. Instead, Rob charged. The first shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways but not stopping his momentum. The second hit his abdomen as he reached for her. The third, fourth, and fifth shots came in rapid succession as he kept coming, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. Only after the fifth did he finally collapse, blood pooling on Emma's pink carpet. Sarah stood frozen, gun still raised, as the echoes of gunfire gave way to a terrible silence. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear sirens. A neighbor must have called it in. Slowly, she lowered her weapon and reached for the radio she always kept on her belt. "This is Sheriff Mitchell," she said, her voice unnaturally calm. "Officer involved shooting at 1425 Pinewood Lane. Suspect down. Send ambulance and backup, and contact Child Protective Services." She paused, looking at her husband's body, the man she'd shared a bed with for 15 years. "And someone find my daughter." Deputy Mark Wilson was the first to arrive, his cruiser skidding to a halt in the driveway. He found Sarah sitting on Emma's bed, her weapon secured and placed on the dresser, staring at Rob's body with vacant eyes. "Jesus Christ, Sarah," Mark whispered, taking in the scene. He'd known both Sarah and Rob since high school, had been an usher at their wedding. "He was molesting her, Mark," Sarah said flatly. "I caught him with Emma." Mark's face hardened. Instantly, like most law enforcement in small towns, he'd seen his share of family violence cases, and few were treated with more disgust than those involving children. "EMTs are 3 minutes out," he said professionally, securing the scene. "Your daughter's safe at Maria Garcia's house. Maria called it in when Emma showed up hysterical." Sarah nodded, still not moving from the bed. Shock was setting in, her training told her distantly. The same training that had her counting Rob's breaths to report to the paramedics when they arrived. The same training that had her reciting exactly what happened to Mark, who wrote it all down with a shaking hand. "You need to give me your weapon, Sarah," Mark said gently. "Standard procedure." She nodded again, watching as he carefully took her service weapon into evidence. "I used all 5 rounds," she said mechanically. "Close range, defensive posture." The house quickly filled with emergency personnel, paramedics working on Rob, crime scene technicians photographing everything, more deputies securing the area. Sheriff Richard Dawson arrived, his face grave as Mark briefed him in hushed tones. Sarah watched it all as if from a great distance, answering questions automatically when asked. "He's still alive," a paramedic announced, surprising everyone in the room. "Barely. We need to transport now." As they wheeled Rob out on a stretcher, oxygen mask over his face, Sarah felt nothing. Not relief, not disappointment, not anger. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Just a vast emptiness where 15 years of marriage had been. Sheriff Dawson approached her carefully, like she might break. "Sarah, you know the drill," he said gently. "Administrative leave, pending investigation. I need your badge." She handed it over without protest, the shield she'd worn with such pride suddenly meaningless compared to her failure to protect her own daughter. "Where's Emma?" she asked, the first sign of emotion cracking through her professional veneer. "Maria's bringing her to the station. Child Protective Services will interview her, and Dr. Lopez is coming in to help." Dawson hesitated. "This is by the book, Sarah. Not because anyone doubts you, but because it has to be clean, especially with who you are." Sarah nodded. The sheriff shooting her husband would make headlines across Texas. If Rob survived, there would be a trial. Emma would have to testify. The thought made her physically ill. At the Pine Creek Sheriff's Department, her department until a few hours ago, Sarah sat in an interview room rather than her office. District Attorney Olivia Carter sat across from her, recorder between them, while Mark stood in the corner. The clock on the wall read 8:17 a.m. Sarah had been awake for over 26 hours. "For the record," Olivia began formally, "can you state your name and position?" "Sarah Jean Mitchell, Sheriff of Rosedale County." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Please walk us through the events of this morning, Sheriff." Sarah recounted everything in precise detail: the odd parking job, the lights, the muddy boots, the whiskey, Emma's voice, what she saw when she opened the door, the struggle, the 5 shots. Years of giving testimony made the recitation almost mechanical. "Had you any prior suspicion that your husband might be abusing your daughter?" Olivia asked, her face professionally neutral. "No." The word felt like a confession. "I should have known. There were signs." Sarah stopped, her professional demeanor finally cracking. "Emma's been withdrawing. Her grades dropped. She stopped wanting me to work nights. I thought it was just puberty, normal preteen stuff." Olivia nodded sympathetically. "Has Emma disclosed any information about previous incidents?" "I haven't been allowed to speak with her yet." The pain of this hit Sarah anew. "Is she okay? What has she said?" "Dr. Lopez is with her now," Mark said from the corner. "Maria stayed with her until CPS arrived. She's physically okay, Sarah. Physically okay." The implied, but not emotionally, hung in the air between them. "Rob's in surgery," Olivia added. 2 bullets missed vital organs, but 3 did significant damage. The doctors aren't optimistic." Sarah waited for some feeling to surface, grief, satisfaction, anything, but found only concern for Emma. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "You'll remain on administrative leave with pay while the Texas Rangers investigate the shooting," Olivia explained. "Standard procedure for officer-involved shootings, especially with these. Complicated circumstances. The Rangers will want to interview you again, and there will be a grand jury to determine if charges should be filed. Charges? Sarah's attention snapped back fully. He was assaulting my daughter. And the evidence supports that, Olivia assured her. But 5. Shots at close range requires thorough investigation. You know that, Sarah. She did know. If the positions were reversed, if it had been any other parent in Pine Creek who shot someone 5 times, Sarah would insist on the same process. The law existed independent of emotion, a principle she'd upheld her entire career. When Sarah was finally allowed to see Emma, it was under supervision, in a room at the sheriff's department designed for interviewing minors. Colorful walls, comfortable furniture, recording equipment hidden discreetly. Emma looked smaller somehow, curled up in an oversized chair, Maria Garcia sitting protectively nearby. Dr. Lopez, the county's child psychologist, nodded reassuringly at Sarah from her position by the door. "Mom?" Emma's voice was barely audible. Sarah crossed the room and knelt before her daughter, careful not to touch her without permission. Another protocol she knew from years of handling abuse cases. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Emma launched herself into Sarah's arms, sobbing. Sarah held her, rocking slightly, her own tears finally coming. Over Emma's shoulder, she met Dr. Lopez's eyes, silently questioning. "Emma's been very brave," the psychologist said quietly. "She shared some important information with us." Sarah continued holding her daughter, understanding the implication. Emma had disclosed abuse, likely ongoing abuse. The last piece of Sarah that had been hoping for some innocent explanation, some terrible misunderstanding, died quietly. "Am I in trouble?" Emma whispered against Sarah's shoulder. "No, sweetheart, you've done nothing wrong. Nothing. Is Daddy going to die?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "The doctors are taking care of him. Right now, all you need to worry about is taking care of you." When Emma had calmed enough to sit back in her chair, Dr. Lopez gently explained that Sarah couldn't take Emma home yet, another standard procedure in abuse cases. Emma would stay with Sarah's parents temporarily while the investigation continued. "But when can I come home?" Emma asked, fresh tears threatening. "Soon," Sarah promised, though she had no idea if it was true. Their home was now a crime scene. Even if she were allowed to return, Sarah couldn't imagine sleeping in the bed. She'd shared with Rob, walking past Emma's room, where she'd fired 5 bullets into her husband. News traveled fast in Pine Creek. By noon, the story had reached every household in Rosedale County, though wildly different versions circulated. Sarah Mitchell had caught her husband cheating. No, she'd discovered him abusing their daughter. No, it was a drunken argument gone wrong. The Bluebird Diner buzzed with speculation, neighbors called neighbors, and the local newspaper's website crashed from traffic. Outside Lakeside Memorial Hospital, where Rob fought for his life in surgery, reporters from Dallas and Houston had already set up camp. The small-town sheriff shooting her husband was sensational enough. Add in the whispers about child abuse, and the media frenzy was inevitable. Frank Mitchell, Rob's younger brother, arrived from Houston by early afternoon, pushing past reporters without comment. Inside, he found Sheriff Dawson waiting. "How is he?" Frank demanded. "Critical, still in surgery." Dawson regarded Frank cautiously. "You should know there are serious allegations." "I know my brother," Frank interrupted. "Whatever Sarah's claiming, Rob would never hurt Emma. Never." Dawson's expression hardened. "The evidence suggests otherwise." "Evidence? You mean the word of a woman who shot my brother 5 times, who's judge, jury, and executioner?" Frank's voice rose, drawing attention from nearby nurses. "What kind of investigation are you running when you've already decided he's guilty?" "The Texas Rangers are handling the investigation, not us," Dawson corrected. And there's physical evidence beyond Sheriff Mitchell's statement. This gave Frank pause. What evidence? That's not something I can discuss with you right now. Frank ran a hand through his hair, the same sandy brown as his brother's. This is insane. Our parents are on their way from Austin. They're in their 70s. Do you know what this will do to them? Their son shot by their daughter-in-law, and now you're saying he's some kind of monster. I'm saying there's an investigation, Dawson repeated firmly. And until it's complete, you might want to reserve judgment. By evening, Rob was out of surgery, alive but in critical condition. The surgeons had removed his spleen, repaired damage to his liver, and placed him in a medically induced coma. The prognosis was guarded at best. Sarah spent the night at her parents' modest home on the other side of Pine Creek, sleeping on the couch while Emma took her childhood bedroom. Sleep eluded her, despite her exhaustion. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Rob lunging at her, felt the recoil of her weapon, heard Emma crying. Around 4 a.m., she gave up trying and sat on her parents' front porch, watching the stars fade as dawn approached. Her father joined her as the first light of day touched the eastern sky. Harold Wilson had been Pine Creek's mayor for 20 years before retiring to fish and spoil his granddaughter. He handed Sarah a cup of coffee and sat beside her in comfortable silence for several minutes. "You did what you had to do," he finally said. Sarah stared into her coffee. "Did I? 5 shots, Dad. I emptied my weapon into him." He was hurting Emma. Harold's voice took on a hard edge she rarely heard. "If you hadn't come home when you did, I should have known." The words escaped before Sarah could stop them. What kind of mother doesn't know? What kind of sheriff? Don't do that to yourself. Harold put his arm around her shoulders. Predators like that, they're careful. They hide, even from sheriffs. Did Mom tell you what Emma said about how long it's been going on? Harold's silence was answer enough. Sarah felt sick thinking about all the nights she'd worked late, the weekend shifts she'd taken to provide a better life for her family, never imagining the danger was already inside her home. "The Rangers are coming today," she said, changing the subject. "They'll want to interview Emma. Your mother and I will be with her every step of the way," Harold promised. "And James Sullivan called last night. He's taking your case pro bono." Sarah looked up in surprise. Sullivan was the best defense attorney in East Texas, known for handling high-profile cases in Dallas and Houston. "I don't need—" "Yes, you do," Harold interrupted firmly. "This isn't just about you shooting Rob. This is about protecting your career, your reputation, and most importantly, your ability to be there for Emma going forward. Sullivan knows how to handle the media circus this is becoming." As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed with a news alert. The local paper's headline read, "Sheriff shoots husband, heroic mother, or vengeful wife." Below it was her official department photo beside a picture of her and Rob from last year's town festival, both smiling as if everything was perfect. Sarah closed her eyes, suddenly overwhelmed by the knowledge that this was just the beginning. The investigation, potential charges, Rob's family's reaction, the media attention, and worst of all, Emma's recovery from trauma that had been happening right under her nose. The weight of it all threatened to crush her. "One day at a time," Harold said, seeming to read her thoughts. "Today we focus on Emma. Everything else can wait." Inside the house, Sarah heard movement, her mother starting breakfast, Emma's footsteps on the creaky floorboards. Life continuing somehow, despite everything. Sarah took a deep breath, then another. Her father was right. Emma came first. Everything else, the investigation, her career, the truth about her marriage, would have to wait. The Texas Rangers arrived at Harold and Martha Wilson's home promptly at 9 the next morning. Lead investigator Diana Reyes, a 20-year veteran, with a reputation for thoroughness, interviewed Sarah first, while her partner spoke with Emma in the presence of Dr. Lopez and Martha. Sarah recounted her story again, this time with James Sullivan sitting beside her, occasionally placing a steadying hand on her arm when emotion threatened to overwhelm her professional demeanor. "To be clear," Investigator Reyes said, reviewing her notes, "you fired all 5 rounds while your husband was advancing toward you?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "He didn't stop after the first shot or the second. He kept coming." Sullivan interjected smoothly, "My client, who has an exemplary record in law enforcement, feared for her life and her daughter's safety after discovering her husband in the act of molesting their child." Reyes nodded without commenting directly. "We'll need your clothing from that night, Sheriff Mitchell, and there will be a gunshot residue test, though given the circumstances, that's merely procedural." "I understand," Sarah said. She'd authorized hundreds of such tests during her career. Now she was on the other side. At Lakeside Memorial Hospital, Rob regained consciousness briefly, though he remained intubated and unable to speak. Frank Mitchell was at his bedside, along with their parents, Elizabeth and Harold Mitchell, who looked shell-shocked by the situation unfolding around them. "The Rangers are here to ask you some questions," the ICU nurse explained to Frank, as Investigator Reyes's partner, Ranger Jason Collier, entered the room. "Could you step outside with them?" In the hallway, Ranger Collier confirmed that while Rob couldn't give a statement yet, they had collected physical evidence from the scene, including Emma's pajamas and bedding, which were being processed at the state crime lab. "You can't seriously believe these accusations," Frank hissed, keeping his voice low to prevent his parents from hearing. "Rob's a contractor, a little league coach. He built half the decks in this town with his own hands." "Mr. Mitchell, I understand this is difficult," Collier replied evenly, "but we've interviewed the child with trained specialists present. Her account is detailed and consistent with the physical evidence." "She's 12. Kids make things up all the time. Maybe Sarah coached her. The forensic evidence doesn't lie, Mr. Mitchell, and neither do the text messages we've recovered from your brother's phone." This stopped Frank cold. "What messages?" Ranger Collier's face remained impassive. "Messages to an online support group for people with inappropriate attractions to children. Your brother has been seeking help, apparently, but also justifying his behavior." Frank staggered backward until he hit the wall. "That's not possible. We've subpoenaed the full records from the platform. There are messages going back 18 months. Collier paused, letting the information sink in. "Your brother needs a lawyer, Mr. Mitchell, and your niece needs support, not accusations." News of the text messages reached Sarah that evening through DA Olivia Carter, who called to inform her that the case against her was weakening by the hour. The Rangers had executed search warrants on all of Rob's devices and accounts, uncovering not just the support group messages, but private online storage containing disturbing material. "They found images, Sarah," Olivia said gently. "Not of Emma. Thank God, but it's bad. The Rangers are building a case against Rob now, not you." Sarah sat at her parents' kitchen table, the phone pressed to her ear, feeling hollow. Part of her had still been hoping for some explanation, some way that she'd misinterpreted what she saw. Now that hope was gone. "What about Emma?" she asked. "Will she have to testify?" "If Rob recovers enough to stand trial, possibly, but with this evidence, his attorney will likely advise him to take a plea deal." 3 days after the shooting, the Pine Creek Gazette published an editorial supporting Sarah, praising her actions as both a mother and a law enforcement officer. The competing narrative, that she'd overreacted or manufactured allegations to cover an act of rage, collapsed under the weight of mounting evidence. The Texas Rangers officially recommended no charges against her. At Lakeside Memorial, Rob's condition deteriorated. Pneumonia set in, common for patients with abdominal wounds and prolonged intubation. By the end of the week, as sepsis took hold, his parents made the decision to withdraw life support. Rob Mitchell died on Sunday evening, never having regained full consciousness or offered any explanation for his actions. Sarah received the news from Sheriff Dawson, who came to her parents' home in person. "It's over," he said simply, standing on the porch where she'd taken to spending most of her time. But it wasn't over. Not for Emma, who still woke screaming from nightmares. Not for Sarah, who couldn't close her eyes without seeing Rob lunging at her, feeling the recoil of her weapon. Not for the community, which had fractured along lines of support and condemnation. The funeral was small and tense, held at the Mitchell family's church in Austin rather than in Pine Creek. Sarah didn't attend, but sent flowers with a card signed only with Emma's name. Frank Mitchell returned them, torn to pieces. 2 weeks after the shooting, the Rangers concluded their investigation. The report was comprehensive and damning. Robert Mitchell had been abusing his daughter for at least a year, possibly longer. The evidence included text messages, online activity, physical evidence from Emma's bedroom, and most importantly, Emma's own testimony, recorded during specialized forensic interviews. The case file officially closed with Rob's death, but the repercussions continued to ripple outward. 2 more families came forward with concerns about Rob's behavior around their daughters during his time as a Little League coach. The school district began an audit of its volunteer screening procedures, and Sarah faced the daunting task of rebuilding her life and her daughters. Sheriff Dawson arrived at the Wilsons' home exactly 1 month after the shooting, carrying Sarah's badge. "The review board cleared you for full reinstatement," he said, holding it out to her. "Your job is waiting whenever you're ready." Sarah stared at the badge, remembering how proud she'd been when she first pinned it on, how certain she'd been of her ability to protect her community. "I don't know if I can go back," she admitted. "You're a good sheriff, Sarah. What happened at home doesn't change that." But it had changed everything. Sarah had spent her career believing she could spot predators, that her training gave her special insight into the darkest parts of human nature. Yet she'd shared a bed with one for 15 years and never suspected. "Take your time," Dawson said, setting the badge on the porch railing. "The department will be there when you're ready." That evening, Sarah sat with Emma on the back porch of her parents' house, watching fireflies emerge as dusk settled over Pine Creek. Emma had started therapy with Dr. Lopez 3 times a week, and though the road ahead was long, there were small signs of healing. Today, for the first time since that night, Emma had laughed at something her grandmother said over dinner. "Mom," Emma asked, breaking their comfortable silence, "are we ever going back to our house?" Sarah considered the question carefully. The house remained sealed with crime scene tape, though the Rangers had concluded their physical investigation. In time, it would be released back to her. She could sell it, move somewhere new, try to outrun the memories. "Do you want to?" she asked instead of answering. Emma was quiet for so long that Sarah thought she might not respond. Finally, she said, "I don't think so. Too many bad dreams there." Sarah nodded, putting her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Then we won't. We'll find a new place, just for us." "Can we get a dog?" A hint of the old Emma shone through the trauma. "We can definitely get a dog." Sarah smiled, feeling a tiny spark of hope ignite. "Maybe 2. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah sat alone, scrolling through real estate listings on her phone. Pine Creek suddenly felt too small, too full of whispers and sidelong glances. But Rosedale County was home, the only place she'd ever lived, where her parents and support system remained. She found herself looking at properties on the other side of the county near the lake. Fresh starts didn't require running away completely. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Thinking of you both. Office misses you. When you're ready, we're here. Sarah stared at the message, then at her badge sitting on the side table where she'd placed it. For 15 years, she'd failed to see what was happening in her own home. The realization that had been building for weeks finally crystallized. No badge, no training, no professional accomplishment could make up for that blind spot. But hiding from it wouldn't help Emma heal either. The truth was both simpler and more complex than she'd been ready to face. Rob had been sick in ways she couldn't have predicted or prevented, a master of deception who'd fooled not just his wife, but an entire community. Her training might have failed her at home, but her instincts as a mother had ultimately protected Emma when it mattered most. Sarah picked up her badge, feeling its familiar weight. Tomorrow, she would look at the lakeside properties. She would call Dr. Lopez about adjusting Emma's therapy schedule, and she would tell Sheriff Dawson she'd return to work, not because she still believed in her infallibility, but because she understood her limits now. That knowledge, painful as it was, made her not a worse sheriff, but potentially a better one. Some wounds would never fully heal. Some questions would never be answered. But as Sarah finally felt exhaustion overtaking her, one certainty provided comfort. She had done what was necessary to protect her child. Everything else, her career, the community's opinion, her own guilt and grief, was secondary to that truth. In the end, it was the only metric that mattered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.